I used to lie every single time someone asked me my name, and the worst part was that I did not even realize I was lying. I genuinely thought my name was you. Sometimes I spelled it you because other kids told me it sounded prettier that way. Other times I wrote you because I thought maybe names could be shortened like that. Nobody had ever cared enough to tell me otherwise. The day my second grade teacher looked at me with tears in her eyes and asked, "Are you telling me nobody ever gave you a real name?" was the day my entire life changed forever. I was born when my parents were barely adults themselves. My mom, Melissa, had me only a few months after graduating high school, and according to relatives I later met as an adult, my dad had acted thrilled in the beginning. He told everyone he was ready to be a father. He promised my mom they would build a life together and raise me as a family. But apparently all that excitement disappeared the moment I was born. My dad walked out of the hospital 2 days later and never really came back. My mom spent the next several years blaming me for every bad thing that happened in her life. We lived in a tiny apartment that always smelled like cigarette smoke and old takeout containers. The walls were stained yellow, the carpet had dark spots everywhere, and the kitchen sink was usually overflowing with dishes. I remember hearing my mom cry late at night sometimes, but I also remember hearing her scream at me more often than she ever comforted me. Even when I was very small, I could feel that she hated looking at me because I reminded her of everything she lost. The strangest part of my childhood was that I never realized how abnormal my life actually was. Kids accept the world they grow up in because they have nothing to compare it to. My mom never called me by a name. She would point at me and say things like, "You, get over here. Girl, clean this mess up. Kid, stop touching things. Child, sit down and shut up." When she was especially angry, which was often, she called me mistake. At first I thought everyone had multiple names depending on the mood of their parents. I honestly believed that was normal. Nobody ever sat me down and explained what a given name was supposed to mean. There were no bedtime stories, no birthday cakes with my name written in frosting, no school labels sewn into jackets. I existed in this weird empty space where I was a person without an identity. When I started kindergarten, the office staff asked my mom what my name was. She barely looked up from her phone before saying, "Just put you or something." I still remember the confused expression on the secretary's face. Looking back now, I realize there were probably already problems with my paperwork from the beginning. My birth certificate had apparently never been fully completed correctly, and my mom had ignored multiple notices over the years because she simply did not care. In school, the teachers started calling me you because they assumed it was an uncommon cultural name. Some students asked if I was Chinese. I told them maybe, even though I knew we were not. I was desperate to sound normal, desperate to belong to something. I became obsessed with other children's names. I remember sitting in class during attendance and feeling jealous every single morning. There were girls named Claire, Madison, Elena, Sophie, and boys named Carter, Liam, and Jackson. Their names sounded warm and complete, like they belonged in storybooks. Every time a teacher called their names, those kids answered confidently without hesitation. Meanwhile, every time someone said you, I felt this strange hollow feeling inside my chest because deep down I knew something about me was wrong. At home, things only got worse as I got older. My mom worked random jobs but spent most of her money on alcohol, cigarettes, and lottery tickets. She would disappear for hours and sometimes leave me alone overnight with canned soup and strict instructions not to open the door for anyone. Whenever bills piled up or she fought with boyfriends, she blamed me. She constantly reminded me that my birth ruined her future. One night when I was around 6 years old, I finally asked her the question that had been building inside me for months. I remember standing in the doorway of the living room while she watched television. I asked her why I did not have a pretty name like the other girls at school. She slowly turned toward me with this cold expression I still cannot forget. Then she laughed. Not a happy laugh, the kind that makes your stomach hurt because you instantly know you should not have spoken. She told me names were for children who mattered. She said I was an accident that destroyed her life before it even started. She reminded me that my father abandoned us because of me, and that we were poor because she had wasted her youth raising a child she never wanted. Then she looked directly at me and said something that stayed in my head for years. "You do not deserve a name." I remember going to my room afterward and crying into my pillow until I could barely breathe. That was the first moment I truly understood I was different from everyone else. I started avoiding mirrors after that because I hated looking at myself. I thought maybe my mom was right, maybe there was something wrong with me. Maybe I really was just a mistake pretending to be a person. By second grade, I had become extremely quiet in school. I rarely spoke unless a teacher called on me directly. I spent recess sitting alone drawing fake signatures in notebooks because I desperately wanted to imagine what it would feel like to own a real name. Sometimes I wrote random names beside little hearts just to see how they looked: Emma, Lily, Charlotte, Ava. I loved the way names looked when they were written carefully in colorful marker. My teacher that year was a woman named Mrs. Patterson. And unlike most adults in my life, she actually paid attention to me. She noticed things. She noticed I wore the same clothes repeatedly. She noticed I flinched whenever adults raised their voices. She noticed I never talked about my family. One afternoon, she stopped me after class because of a spelling worksheet I had turned in. At the top of the page, where students wrote their names, I had apparently written for different versions, you mistake. She crouched beside my desk and gently asked why I had written different names. I shrugged and told her I had lots of names depending on what my mom called me. At first she looked confused, then concerned, then absolutely horrified. She carefully asked me what my real name was, and I remember answering honestly, I do not know. The silence afterward felt enormous. Mrs. Patterson took me to the counselor's office, where several adults started asking me questions. None of them sounded angry. That confused me more than anything. Adults usually sounded irritated whenever they spoke to me. These people sounded heartbroken. I told them everything because nobody had ever asked before. I told them my mom called me mistake when she drank too much. I told them she said I ruined her life. I told them I did not think I had a real birth certificate because I once overheard her yelling about paperwork on the phone. I told them sometimes there was not enough food in the apartment. Within hours, police officers and child protective services became involved. That night, for the first time in my life, I did not go home. I remember sitting in the back seat of a social worker's car clutching a trash bag filled with my clothes while staring out the window. I was terrified, but underneath the fear there was also the strange feeling I could not describe at the time: relief. For once, nobody was yelling at me. My mom was arrested shortly afterward for child neglect and abuse. I did not see it happen, but one of the social workers later told me she screamed that I had ruined her life all over again when they took her away. Hearing that hurt more than I expected. Even after everything she had done, a part of me still wanted her to love me. The foster home I stayed in was nothing fancy, but to me it felt unreal. There were clean blankets, warm meals, and adults who asked permission before touching me. I remember crying the first night because the foster mother tucked me into bed and said good night. Nobody had ever done that before. Still, the issue of my name followed me everywhere. Social workers kept asking what I wanted to be called, and every time I froze. I felt embarrassed and ashamed. It was like being exposed in front of the world. Most children inherit names from love or family history. I inherited emptiness. About 3 weeks into foster care, I was sitting in the common room flipping through old magazines while other kids watched television. One magazine had a celebrity on the cover named Hailey Bieber. I remember staring at the name Hailey over and over again. Something about it immediately grabbed me. It sounded soft and bright at the same time. The kind of name a girl with a happy life would have. I whispered it quietly to myself. Hailey, then again, Hailey. For the first time in my entire life, I felt connected to a name. A week later, everything changed again when a couple came to meet me. Their names were Catherine and William Carter. Though everyone called them Kate and Will, they were wealthy, polished, and honestly intimidating at first. Kate wore elegant sweaters and smelled like vanilla perfume. William had silver streaks in his hair and the calmest voice I had ever heard. They could not have children biologically, and they had been trying to adopt for years. I expected them to reject me the way I assumed everyone eventually would. I barely spoke during our first meeting because I was terrified of saying something wrong. But Kate sat beside me on the floor while we worked on a puzzle together, and she talked to me like I mattered. Not like I was broken, not like I was a burden. When they asked what I liked to do for fun, I almost cried because nobody had ever asked me a question like that before. After several visits, they officially adopted me. The court hearing remains one of the clearest memories of my childhood. I wore a pale blue dress Kate had bought specifically for me. The judge smiled warmly and explained that I would finally receive proper legal documents, including my official name. He asked if I had thought about what name I wanted. My hands shook from nervousness, but I answered immediately, Haley. The judge smiled and wrote it down. Just like that, I finally existed. I cannot fully explain the emotional impact of hearing someone say my real name for the first time. Kate hugged me afterward and kept repeating, "Welcome home, Haley." Every time she said it, I felt something healing inside me. It was like all those empty spaces from childhood slowly started filling in. Life with Kate and William felt unreal in the beginning. They lived in a beautiful house with giant windows and soft blankets in every room. I had my own bedroom for the first time. There were bookshelves, warm lighting, and framed photos hanging on walls. They celebrated my birthday even though they did not know the exact date my mom had originally brought me home from the hospital. Kate said every child deserved a day dedicated entirely to them. The hardest adjustment was learning how to accept kindness. Whenever someone raised their voice, I panicked. I apologized constantly for everything, even things that were not my fault. Sometimes I hid food under my bed because I was scared it would disappear. Kate found granola bars hidden in my pillowcase once and cried after realizing why I did it. They put me in therapy, which I hated at first. I thought talking about my childhood would make me weak. But over time, my therapist helped me understand something important. What happened to me was not normal, and it was not my fault. That idea took years to fully believe. As I grew older, I slowly learned how much damage emotional neglect can do to a child. People often think abuse only counts if there are bruises, but words can shape a person just as deeply. Being told your existence ruins someone's life changes the way you see yourself. Even now, as an adult, there are moments when I still struggle with feeling worthy of love. For a long time, I hated introducing myself because saying my name felt strangely emotional. Teachers, friends, co-workers, and eventually college classmates would casually say, "Hi, Haley," and they had no idea how much that simple sentence meant to me. A name is such a basic thing most people never think twice about it. But for me, having a name meant finally being seen as human. When I turned 18, I requested copies of all my childhood records because I wanted answers. That was when I discovered the full extent of the neglect. My mother had ignored repeated legal notices regarding incomplete birth registration paperwork. Several agencies had tried contacting her over the years. School enrollment had apparently been a nightmare because certain identification documents were missing or inconsistent. Somehow she kept slipping through the cracks because the system failed to fully investigate, until my second-grade teacher intervened. Reading those records made me furious all over again. There were detailed reports describing how withdrawn I was as a child. Teachers noted I seemed afraid of adults. One report stated that I displayed confusion regarding my own identity and legal name. Seeing my trauma described in clinical language felt surreal. My mother ended up serving 5 years in prison for child neglect and abuse charges. People sometimes ask if I have forgiven her, and the truth is complicated. I understand she was young, abandoned, poor, and emotionally unstable. I know she probably needed that follow you forever, but I still remember the exact does not erase the damage. She told me I did not deserve a name. No child should ever hear those words from a parent. A few years ago, she tried contacting me through social media after being released from prison. I stared at the message for nearly an hour before deleting it. Part of me wondered if she had changed. Another part remembered crying alone in that filthy apartment while she blamed me for existing. In the end, I realized something important. Closure does not always come from reconnecting with people who hurt you. Sometimes closure comes from building a life so full of peace that their absence no longer controls you. Today, I'm 20 years old. I am in college studying child psychology because I want to help children who grew up feeling invisible like I did. Kate and William still call me every Sunday evening without fail. My bedroom at their house is still exactly the way I left it. Every birthday, Kate buys me a cake with my name written across the top in beautiful icing. And every single year I still get emotional seeing it. Haley, 8 letters that completely changed my life. Sometimes I think about the little girl sitting alone in the back of a second-grade classroom, unsure of who she even was. I wish I could go back and hug her. I wish I could tell her she was never a mistake. That one day people would say her name with love. That one day she would finally understand she deserved to exist just as much as anyone else. Most of all, I wish I could tell her that losing everything that day at school was actually the beginning of being found.